Hello, everyone. I'm Ralph, a software engineer here at Genesys, and I would like to share in this DevDrop how to use Amazon API Gateway to invoke Genesys Cloud APIs. And this is part 6, API Gateway with Genesys Cloud CLI. Now that you have your API Gateway invoking Genesys Cloud APIs, we can now use it for our suite of tools, specifically the Genesys Cloud CLI, CXS code, and the SDKs. I'll be covering it in different videos. So for this part, I'll be covering the Genesys Cloud CLI. So in summary, the Genesys Cloud CLI is a standalone CLI designed for interfacing with the Genesys Cloud API. You can perform API commands right from a computer's terminal. And since the CLI invokes Genesys Cloud API, you can configure it to invoke the API via the API gateway. So there are a few things that you'll be needing in order to configure the gateway to use it by the CLI, CXS code, and SDKs. So there are 6 things. So the first one is the host name. So it's the endpoint or the domain that you have created on the API gateway. So for example, in the example that we created in the Amazon API gateway has a format like this. So it's like the ID, then dot execute dash API dot your region that it has been deployed dot amazonaws.com/stage. And then the second one is the port number. So when the API gateway is deployed automatically, it's an HTTPS. So it's usually in the port number 443. But if you have other API gateways that are not deployed in the Amazon API gateway, and it's an HTTP, the usual default is 80. But depending on how you deploy your API gateway, you have to set the necessary port number. Then the next one is the protocol. It's either the HTTP or the HTTPS, depending on how you configure it. Then the number 4 and number 5 is the username or password. Depending on how you configured your API gateway, you might require some authentication in order to use it. So with our tools, we have supported it that you can provide the username and password for authentication. And the last one is the gateway path parameters. This is conditionally optional because this is the path in the gateway that points to either the login URL of Genesys or the API URL. This is conditionally optional because there are some cases where in your profiles, in the CLI, particularly, you have the authorization grants. For example, you have provided the client credentials. And once you have set the API gateway configuration in CLI, it will also call the API gateway to call the login path, which is the login.mypurecloud.com. And you have to provide it in the API gateway that you have set up, which we'll also do before I show you how to configure it in the CLI. So let's create here a resource called Genesys Login. By the way, this is the same REST API that we created in this DevDrop. So as you can see here is the proxy integration, and then this is the non-proxy one. So I'm just creating another resource for the login path. So let's create another resource in the Genesys login, and we'll set it as a proxy resource. Oops, sorry. That's plus. We still have to specify it regardless. So let's add an integration on this one, since it's a proxy. Let's use an any method. And then let's enter the login.mypurecloud.com/proxy. Don't forget the proxy if you're going to do a proxy integration on this. So let's save it. I think this is okay. Let's deploy it in the test stage again. And in order to prove that the CLI will call to the API gateway, let's turn on the logs. So I've just add the errors and info logs and added the data tracing and detailed metrics, and which will see that it will have a detailed information on what happened to the request when going through the API gateway. So let's try to test it in the Postman. I think this is the same one. Yep, that we did last time. So let's just call this one. And then we can see through the CloudWatch that I just called it recently. Yep, I think it's here in the API gateway execution logs with the same ID of the API gateway. So yeah, here, and let's just refresh it. Yeah, this is the one that I called. And you can see that it has a very detailed logs, starting from the start, on which path it chose, what query string, the method request, the response body before transformations, and things like that. So I digress. So let's go on how to configure the CLI to call the API gateway. So with the Genesys Cloud CLI versions 1.10.1.0 or greater, there are 3 ways in order for you to do it. So the first one is you can set it up during GC profiles new command when you're setting new profiles, or you can set it manually in the config.toml, which is located in the .gc/config.toml from your home directory. And usually you can add these information in the TOML file, or which depending on which is convenient for you, you can save it in a JSON file. And then you can run the command gc gateway and then given the file name, and then it will be saved in the TOML file. And then you can also disable it with gc gateway disable, and it will be just removed from the TOML file. So let's go to demonstrate it. So I have already set up an IDE just to see. So this is the config.toml file. I've already set up a default one since I've been testing, and we can create a new one. So gc profiles new with the gateway configuration. So let's name this another profile. The environment is mypurecloud.com. You can change it depending on your use case. For access token, let's just use the one in Postman. I think, yeah. Just copy this one, paste it. Let's not set an authorization grant type. No proxy server. And then this is the part where you can set up the gateway configuration. And then for the protocol, let's use HTTPS for gateway 443. The host name, let's just copy it from here. Then to require authorization, no. This is the username and password. We won't be needing it. Yes, we have a different gateway paths for login. And I think it's Genesys. We don't need to enter anymore. So I think, yeah, this is the profile that we created, and we can use it to enter some commands. Let's just use the same one, which is getting the list of users. List should be another profile. So yeah, we'll use the command another profile to call the list of users in the CLI. So yeah, I think, yeah, since this returns list, this works. And another demo, which is the default, I have set a client credentials here. And let's try to remove this one. Since this is an old token. And since we have the gateway params activated here already, we'll try to get a access token with this endpoint with the gateway. So let's try to call this one without the profile since this is the default and we don't have any access token here yet. Let's try to call and have I deployed this yet? Again. Oh yeah. Let's just see. I think you can see here in the logs that this is the one that called the one earlier with the access token only. Then let's try to do it with the oh yeah, because we have inputted HTTPS, so this won't work. So try to remove it and retain the yep. So yeah, do be careful sometimes. Just remove the HTTPS the prefix and then just provide this one. So I thought I haven't deployed this one yet. So as you can see that it got some access token and it calls the API and returns the list. And we can also check it here in the logs that it called the login.mypercloud.com/oauth/token to get some token, which has been saved from here. And then it calls the list of users here. So that's how it works. And now that the CLI calls the API gateway instead of the Genesys Cloud's API directly. And the last one is that we can set the gateway through the command. And we can try to do it from here. So since this has already a gateway configuration already, let's try to what's the command? Disable. So we can disable it. So you can disable it and you can return it with given the JSON. I think, yep, it has the same contents. So the host, then the protocol, port, login params. Let's just modify this. Yep. And then let's put it. Yep. It's been enabled here. So yeah, and then we can also disable it again. So yeah, that's just modifies the config.tlml file for you. So yeah, that's it for the Genesys Cloud CLI on setting up the API gateway and the configuration. So it's very easy. And with that, you can check the logs of your CLI for your own purposes. So yeah, that's it. And then on the next part, on the next video, we'll be discussing how to do it in the CXS code. So hope to guys see you in the next one.